Chapter 18 of The Adventures of Puss in Boots Jr. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mickey Lee Rich. The Adventures of Puss in Boots Jr. by David Cory. Puss discovers where Jack is hiding. Puss Jr. found the giant a very agreeable host. Perhaps it was because Puss told so many interesting stories of what he had seen and done since leaving the garret. "By the time you find your father," roared the giant, for even when he whispered it sounded like thunder, "you will have traveled far and wide, my dear friend." They were seated in the giant's great living room. A huge pipe was in his mouth, the smoke from which rose in a cloud as big as that from a factory chimney. Puss Jr. was not the least bit dismayed, however, for he was naturally a brave cat, and his many adventures had given him an air of assurance as well as a liberal education. He sat opposite the giant and recounted his adventures one after another, much to the delight of his great host. All the while, however, Puss was scheming as to the best way to discover Jack. He had made up his mind firmly that after his long climb up the beanstalk, and the fact that he had been so lucky as to make a friend of the giant, he would allow nothing to turn him aside. Finally, the giant fell sound asleep. Puss carefully opened the door and tiptoed into the kitchen where the giant's wife was washing up the supper dishes. As he entered, he noticed that the oven door was open just a crack. "My good woman," said Puss, "your husband is asleep, so I have taken this opportunity to thank you for the very fine supper of which I have just partaken." The giant's wife started at the sound of his voice and immediately walked over and stood in front of the oven as if to guard it from view. "Ha ha," said Puss to himself, "I'll wager Jack is in the oven. I wonder why the good woman mistrusts me." "Madame," said Puss, "I'm in search of a little boy named Jack, and I have a message from his mother for him. Jack of the wonderful beanstalk, and I am sure he is in yonder oven." Puss Jr. heard a scratching sound, then a creak, and in a moment Jack stepped from behind the giant's wife after carefully closing the oven door. "How do you do?" said Jack, coming forward. "And what does mother want?" "She is worried about you," replied Puss Jr., "and asked me to tell you, should I have the good fortune of meeting you, that she hoped you would return home, for she is so lonely." "That I will," answered Jack, "as soon as I have the opportunity." He had hardly finished speaking when the heavy tread of the giant was heard. Jack jumped back into the oven while the giant's wife commenced talking to Puss Jr. as if nothing whatever had happened. "Why did you leave me?" roared the giant, turning fiercely to Puss. "Why did you fall asleep?" asked Puss. "Were my tales not of sufficient interest to keep you awake?" "They were," replied the giant, somewhat taken aback by the answer he received. "I guess I have the habit of falling asleep after supper. It's mighty difficult to break a habit." "It is indeed," said Puss. "I feel very sleepy myself. Will you allow me not to break my habit of going to bed early?" The giant laughed long and hard. "Show him to his room, mother," he said, turning to his wife. So Puss said good night and followed her upstairs, having made up his mind to meet Jack at midnight. End of Chapter 18. Recording by Mickey Lee Rich.